Welcome to part B of our 8th topic, and we are done now with more than 50% of this whole series. And in the last presentation we saw that there's the harlots, Babylon, the kings of the earth, the merchants of the earth. So this is these three actors. This whole system of at the end is, these are the three actors that are playing a certain role in this whole system. And we translated it to be the papacy, the chief of states, and the large corporations or the banks. And then we have the inhabitants of the earth. And all these upper three actors, they have some advantage of this whole system, but the inhabitants of the earth, they are really the ones that are suffering from this. It says that they were made drunk. And I'm also bringing you back to the prophetic kingdoms. We saw the 7 prophetic kingdoms, the first Babylon, then Persian, the Empire, then the Greek Empire, then the Roman Empire. Then we had the papacy, the United States being the 6th prophetic kingdom. And then we had the United Nations as this, where I said the 7th kingdom, these 10 horns, this world union. This could be the United Nations. I have a question mark here because we don't know if there's maybe something coming after the United Nations, or we will see. Okay, but the United Nations could be the 10 horns. And in this presentation I want to talk a little bit about the United Nations. A world union. Now Immanuel Kant in the 18th century, this was a German, he already proposed, in order to keep peace and to establish peace on this earth, we would need something like a League of Nations. We have to bring the nations to one table. They have to sit down at one table, and somehow we need to bring the nations together. He proposed something like a League of Nations. He was talking about a united power, a state of nations, and actually he also called, we need a world republic. That's what we need. Now, obviously his counsel wasn't followed, and so we had the First World War. And after the World War, there was something founded, and they called it the League of Nations, like Immanuel Kant proposed it. The problem was that the League of Nations was way too weak to keep peace, and there was a man who realized this, and he's called Coudenhove Kalergi. Now, I don't know exactly how the last part of his name is pronounced. I'm always saying it Coudenhove Kalergi, but it could also be Kalergi, and I don't know. Not that important. He said, we are trying to bring the whole world together in this League of Nations thing. But that's making the second step before we made the first step. So first we actually have to establish something like the United Nations, United States of Europe. And then in the second step, we should establish the world state. So first we have to unite the different continents in certain unions, like the United States of Europe. Then you have the, United States of Africa, United States of whatever. And then the world state. But also his advice wasn't followed. And so we had the Second World War. And after the Second World War, Churchill and de Gaulle, and you can name them, they said, we need the United States of Europe. So that's what Kalergi said. So afterwards we are always wiser than before. Okay. But they started this project in small steps because they knew if they would bring this United States thing upon the European population, they would refuse it to the utmost. So they started this very slowly. First we started with economics. Okay, it started with trades and economics, and then it slowly increased, and then we had the European Union, and the European Union then in 2004 tried to give itself a constitution. And why does the European Union need a constitution? Now, a state needs a constitution, right? And it is, of course, because the European Union wants to become a state. Although this is sometimes neglected, but that's simply a lie, or these people do not really see where things go. But of course, the European Union wants to become a state, certainly. And I know in politics, when I went to school, this was the time where the European Constitution was discussed and also voted in 2004. And the European Union, it handed out, or we had a brochure in our politics lessons. And there was written that the goal ultimately is that the European Union will one day become a state. Now, I talked to a teacher in politics, and he said, no, that's not really, that's not said. So maybe they made a step back because they saw there was kind of resistance coming. And the Constitution failed 2004. Okay, there were some states that said, we don't want to have a European Constitution, because they saw in which way the train moves, okay? So they made a step back, but that's certainly the goal. Now they gave themselves, it failed 2004, and then they worked over it a little bit more. In 2009, they give it another name, and then it passed. And I think they also, I don't want to go into this, but that's how it works, okay? It doesn't matter what the population wants, what the inhabitants of the earth want. It doesn't matter. There is a goal, a global goal, and this goal has to be achieved. And that means that if you give this thing the name A and it fails, then you give it another name and you do a bit of propaganda, and then it will work. So now we have a constitution, although they don't name it like this, but in fact it is a constitution. But they also founded the United Nations. And by this they were following what Coudenhove-Kalergi told. First, we need smaller unions, and then in the second step we unite these unions into a large union, into a world union. So they founded the United Nations. And by the way, you see the same development now in North America. What I call CAMUS, because it's way easier to pronounce it that way. Typically in the United States, I think they call it the USMCA. So you see the same development like it was in Europe. First, you always start with trade and economics, and then you let the thing grow till it becomes a union. The problem is with the United Nations. It has also too little authority. We see that the United Nations cannot keep this world from war. There is still wars going on, and even the members of the United Nations, they commit wars. So it has too little authority. That's the problem of the United Nations. So if we want to keep peace on this earth, the United Nations need to evolve on a higher level, to a higher level. But just that you see that this concept of a world union is nothing new. It is old. And it is kind of logic. Now let us see what the kings of the earth, what they were saying. And I just have some of the quotes here, okay? I don't want to have this topic to last 3 hours, so I just took some quotes. Charles de Gaulle, he said, nations must unite in a world government or perish. Published in 1958. So we need a world government. So this is 13 years after the Second World War. Then we have Churchill. Unless some effective supranational government can be set up and brought quickly into action, the prospects of peace and human progress are dark and doubtful. If it is found possible to build a world organization of irresistible force and inviolable authority for the purpose of securing peace, there are no limits to the blessings which all humans may enjoy and share. So if we unite all mankind and all nations into one large nation, so to say, there is blessing without end and joy without end. And it's funny for me, this is actually the same, let me call it propaganda, that you see from the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset and these things that were discussed now. So you will own nothing and you will be happy without end. Because, you know, possession is just a burden on your shoulders, and it's good if this burden rests on someone else's shoulders, on an elite's shoulders that know exactly what is good for you. And it's the same words, the same yeah, bloomy language that Churchill has here as well. And in 1950, Churchill had held a speech in Denmark, Copenhagen, before 5,000 people, and he said the following words there. A united Europe was one of the indispensable pillars of world peace and government, Mr. Churchill said. Okay, 1950, so he clearly says where the train shall go to. It shall go to a united Europe. We do not, now he's quoted, we do not, of course, pretend that a united Europe provides the final and complete solution to all the problems of international relationships. The creation of an authoritative, all-powerful world order is the ultimate aim towards which we must strive. So that's the goal. We need an authoritative, all-powerful world order. Now let me stop here. The logic, and I can understand the logic. Let us just say we can take these men by word. I doubt that we can take them by word. I think there are also other interests in this whole thing than just peace. Because for me, these people have proven through what they did and how they behaved that they are not really people of peace. Okay. But let us just assume that they are really like white doves. They just want to have peace on this earth. It's logic. I mean, if you have only one nation left on this earth, one world nation, so to say, this nation cannot make war with itself. That's the logic. If you have all the nations united and all the societies united and you have one world society, one world nation, one world people, there's no possibility anymore that this nation makes war with itself. Now, the point that they are not realizing or not seeing here is that you are increasing the possibility of civil wars. Because if you throw all the nations into one pot and you mix everything, you still have, and that's a large problem, a huge problem, the problem of civil wars between the different ethnicities. Racism and all these things can become a huge problem. And that's why actually you also have to mix the races. Okay, you have to create, so to say, one world race. And if you achieve that, if you can manage this, that you create through extreme multiculturalism, the creation of one world race, you could also fix that problem. Theoretically. And maybe that's also what they are striving for. Mikhail Gorbachev, he said 2002 in the Sanders Theater of the Harvard University, so this is an important place. I think that we could have done more to build a new world order. Now he's looking back at to the end of the Soviet Union. He says we could have done more in that time to build a new world order that will make it possible to have some kind of global governance while at the same time preserving the cultural and ethnic diversity of the world. Now, this quote is actually interesting because he obviously sees that there is a problem when we go towards a world government, that we, diversity will always lead to uniformity. And it's very simple. If you put all the cultures in one pot and mix it, you will reduce the diversity. Okay, because you will lose culture in this. You will create a new culture, yes, but you will sacrifice a huge amount of culture in order to create this new culture. And he sees that problem, obviously, so he says, somehow we have to preserve the diversity. So that's obviously a challenge that he sees, just as a side note. But there's one thing important, that's the word global governance. Because That's how world order is understood. I will come to this in a moment. We read on. After the end of the Cold War, George Bush and I both said, and all of us said, we need a new world order. Too little has been done to create this new world order. We were not ready to address the process of globalization. Now this quote is actually interesting because he says, George Bush and I, we both said we need a new world order. And he said, all of us said this. And he's also saying what this world order should look like. Namely, it should be a global governance. So we're talking about a world government here. Because this is sometimes neglected. People say, new world order, this just means that that there is a new order now established. One kingdom is falling, the other is rising. But that's not. Mikhail Gorbachev is very explicit here what he and George Bush, both of them, meant with world order, namely a global governance. Okay. And at Lafayette College in 2011, Gorbachev said this to the students. Their students at this college are to be trained for becoming international leaders, internationalists. Basically, that's what they are saying. They should be internationalists. So the opposite to nationalists. Now, nationalism, it's sometimes a bit confusing what nationalism is. Typically, nationalism is when they're saying you have an exaggerated patriotism. That's typically what we describe, how we describe nationalism. Now let me break down nationalism, what it also means. Nationalism basically means that you are striving, or that your goal is a united, sovereign national state. That's what nationalism is actually aiming for. And you have different shades of it, of course, and you have extreme versions of it. But that's basically what nationalism is about. You want to have a united, sovereign national state. And this has to be, and there is chauvinism. And chauvinism is an extreme form of nationalism, where you say that your nation is superior to other nations. And therefore has certain rights that other nations don't have. And a good example of the difference between nationalism and chauvinism you can find in the German national anthem in the first stanza. It says, Germany, Germany, over everything in the world. Now the composer meant this in a nationalist way. What was the situation when he composed that stanza? Germany was shattered through Napoleon into I don't know how many empires and how many kingdoms and provinces and states, and it was really crazy. And he was looking at Germany and he was crying and he said, I have this dream that Germany is united, that Germany is sovereign. And so he's composing this stanza. He says, Germany, Germany, over everything in the world. He was dreaming of this Germany being united and being sovereign again, of this German Republic. That's his goal. And that's what this stanza means. That this is his greatest desire. That's what he wants to express in this. Now the Nazis, they interpreted this stanza in a chauvinistic way. That Germany is superior to all the other nations and therefore has certain rights that other nations don't have. Okay, but that's not how it was actually meant by the composer. So there's actually no problem with the stanza at all. Okay. So this is nationalism. You're striving for a sovereign, united national state. And the contrast to this is internationalism. And this is that you're striving for an united, sovereign, international state. And these two are opposites. Okay. And I'm saying this at this point because this is basically the great struggle and the great fight that we see today in politics. It's not so much about who's right, who's left, or is this a right extremist, a far right, a far left. This is not really the great fight here. The great fight is What are you striving for? A sovereign national state or a sovereign international state? That's where all the problem lies. And you cannot bring these two parties together because you either have the sovereign international state, and that means that your national states are unsovereign, or you have the sovereign national state and then you cannot have a sovereign international state. Okay, so that's the great enemies in politics. Yeah, just as a side note. And in this college, internationalists shall be educated. Okay? And Mikhail Gorbachev is talking to them. He says, the opportunities that existed after the end of the Cold War were not used properly. We saw deterioration where there should have been positive movement toward a new world order. And now he's bringing someone again. So we have the kings of the earth, the politicians. And now he's bringing in Pope. So we have the harlot. Pope John Paul II, whom I regarded as my friend, we were very close, once said, we need a new world order. One that is more stable, more humane and more just. He said it best. No one has been able to improve on that characterization of a new world order. Now, one thing you can put in your mind, when the Pope says something, it is always best and no one can pronounce it and spell it and say it and describe it better. Okay, you can see this today at the speeches on the Pope when someone is commenting on Pope Francis' speech. It's always, he said it best. No one can do it better than he did. Because the popes are world leaders. The popes are not only heads of a church, they are political leaders as well. Behind the scenes, it appears. But for us interesting here is also the Pope is speaking of a new world order. We need it. But we are still facing the problem of building such a world order. We have crisis. We are facing problems of the environment, of backwardness and poverty, of food shortages. All these problems are because we do not have a system of global governance. Okay, so we have global problems, and then the argument is, if we have global problems, these problems can only be solved by a global government. That's simple logic. And that's why they are pushing so much on these global problems. Okay, because we need the global problems in the propaganda in order to establish this world government. Now, I always want to emphasize, I can understand the logic. I can understand the logic. But I don't think that this is a proper solution. Okay. And the way the solution is really brought and we have to say forced upon mankind is also not something I can agree with. So environment, global problems can also only be solved on a global scale. Now, also interesting as a side note, Gorbachev was asked later in an interview at Lafayette, he was asked, you have talked in various ways this evening about progress toward a new world order. You observed that the last election, that means Obama as president, in the United States was a gesture in that direction. For me, it's interesting. So Gorbachev saw that Obama is a new world order president, or was. Because he was an internationalist, and then you had Trump, and Trump was a nationalist. He was for the sovereign national state, okay? And there you have these two different views, okay? And now you have Biden, and Biden is new world order again, okay? So international, sovereign international state. And we have a quote from Gideon Rachman. I just want to go quickly through this. The financial crisis and climate change are pushing national governments toward global solutions. Okay, this is always the same thing. We have global problems, so we need a global solution. Global problems, so we're always pushing the global problems in the front. We paint them before the eyes of the people. So to make them agree and see that we need a global government. Even in countries such as China and the US, there are traditionally fierce guardians of national sovereignty. So it seems everything is in place. For the first time since Homo sapiens began to doodle on cave walls, there is an argument, an opportunity and a means to make serious steps toward a world government. But let us not get carried away. While it seems feasible that some sort of world government might emerge over the next century, so he's quite pessimistic here, Any push for global governance in the here and now will be a painful, slow process. Now for me it's interesting, why is he saying that it will be a painful process? And maybe it's because such things like Great Reset and global distribution of wealth and these things, maybe he has such things in mind. But we see climate change is an important thing here. Now we go to the emergence of the Earth, the third or the second actor in this triangle, David Rockefeller. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will, so this world order. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. So he says, yes, I'm an internationalist and I'm proud of it. I'm building on this one world thing. That's where all my efforts go into. And he says of conspiring against the best interests of the United States. So against the best interests of their nation where they are living in. And they do so because they're internationalists. They do not really care about the national interests. They care about the international interests because they're internationalists. Okay, but basically the point here is, he says, yes, I am and my foundation, we are preparing this world. We are working towards this one world government thing. He says, I'm proud of it. Now there's a next quote of David Rockefeller. And now this quote is heavily discussed. It is said that he said this at a meeting of, this Rockefeller and Bilderberger. These are very top secret meetings. And since he said this quote at one of these meetings, we cannot falsify it or verify it because we don't have a source for it. And we can't have a source for it because, no one had access to this except very elected people. And these people, they were to keep silent, otherwise they will lose their heads. But there was and I found it interesting when I made the research about this quotes. Is it trustworthy? Is it not? I came across the following statement in a forum. There says one guy, I know this is an ancient thread, but this may help. As to original written source or reporter, I can't tell you. Most Bilderberg stuff back then came from the pen of Jim Tucker of The Spotlight. I can say this, however, when I was writing an article on NAFTA for my college paper in 1993, I personally called Rockefeller's Manhattan office to ask some things about his support of NAFTA and also to confirm this quote. His secretary said to me of the Bilderberg quote, that sounds about right. So his secretary said, this what you read to me is in harmony with what David Rockefeller is doing, what he is saying. So, and his secretary knows what he is doing. So he says, so she or her, him, he, we don't know exactly, but the secretary said, it is in harmony with what he says and what he does. And with this knowledge, we read the quote now. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in the past centuries. So this is quite a mouthful, okay? These are words. So we need a intellectual elite that is leading us. Okay, and this brings us again to things like Great Reset and yeah. And the funny thing is they always talk about democracy in this context. But where is the democracy? I mean, they are telling you basically between the lines, but if you're able to read that very bluntly, that you are too stupid to manage your own life and you need someone that is leading you and that is doing the thinking work for you. But that's a different topic. And here we have the World Constitution and Parliament Association. And they published a paper how a world government might look like. And so they quote here Albert Einstein, "There is no salvation for civilization or even the human race other than the creation of a world government." Now he's playing here with words a little bit, salvation, creation. So man is trying to save himself without God. Man is trying to solve the problems of this world without God. And they will fail to here. And that's why he has salvation, creation. So these are religious terms here, and he's using them by purpose. But that's a different topic. Now, for this organization, Gary H. Carr worked for some years. He finally stepped out because the goals and the ways these goals were achieved, or he couldn't support anymore. And he did a good amount of research and then later published a book that is called En Route to Global Occupation. And from this book I quote now, he's writing, "The Club of Rome claims to be an informal organization of less than 100 people who are, in their own words, scientists, educators, economists, humanists, industrialists, and national and international civil servants. Included among these have been members of the Rockefeller family." That's interesting. The club had its beginnings in April of 1968. The Club of Rome has been charged with the task of overseeing the regionalization and unification of the entire world. Okay, that's the task of the Club of Rome. How can we manage this world government thing? How can we regionalize the world in order to unite it? The club's findings and recommendations are published from time to time in special, highly confidential reports, which are sent to the power elite to be implemented. On 17th September 1973, the club released one such report entitled Regionalized and Adaptive Model of the Global World System, prepared by COR members Mihailo Mesarovic and Eduard Prestel. The document reveals that the club has divided the world into 10 political economic regions, which it refers to as kingdoms. While these kingdoms are not set in concrete and changes could still occur, it gives us an idea of what lies ahead. In 1974, Mesarovic and Prestel released their findings in a book entitled Mankind at the Turning Point, which was intended for public consumption. On pages 161 to 164 of this book, the authors display the same 10 regions, only this time the word kingdoms has been omitted. They obviously didn't want the public to know the true nature of the club's political ambitions. And here you see this regionalized and adaptive model of the global world system report, and then on the right there is the book. And there's a scientific article that is discussing I think it's the mathematical model, I don't remember correctly now, the mathematical model that lies behind this regionalization. I mean, this is not people like you and me sitting there and just think, oh, what can we do? We just write something. These are very brilliant minds there, okay? And there's a lot of science behind things like this because they want to establish a system that works. Okay, and they are discussing the mathematical model here, I think. But there it says the model breaks the world into 10 regions. So although we maybe don't have access to this report and to the book, we know that this is not, you know, something like conspiracy theory, but this is really the case. They divided the world into 10 regions. And here you see the map. And there you see, for example, United States and Canada in one. Now we see through Camus or USMCA that they want to also include Mexico in here. Okay. And you still see Europe is smaller. You have the Soviet Union. Now the Soviet Union is not there anymore, so region 2 would be larger. And yeah, they have Turkey included in region 2, but now under Erdogan, Turkey moved towards Islam, so we're probably part of in 7 incorporated. And you have South Africa that was then run by white people, so it was actually it belonged actually to the Western civilization from the mindset, and so it was with Australia and New Zealand in one region. Now today, South Africa is run by black people, so it would probably be part of 8. So there are changes, but and I mean they're also discussing in. Now I don't want to get into this, but here you see them, and it's like Coudenhove-Kalergi said: first smaller unions, then in the next step the World Union. Good. And now I want to introduce to you a man that is a very important figure in the United Nations, Dr. Robert Mueller. He devoted 40 years of his life behind the scenes of the United Nations. And he was finally also the Assistant Secretary General, and he was called the philosopher and prophet of hope in the United Nations. So he's a really important man there. And he's also called the father of global education because he wrote this World Core curriculum. So he was an absolutely important man in the United Nations, and in some aspects the man there. And on his website Good Morning World, he released from time to time some ideas for a better world. And here, idea 4000 is, we are around the year 2000 here. So idea 4000, he wrote, my most important idea and conclusion after all my adult life as a world civil servant is this: the United Nations must be vastly strengthened to resolve the major global problems henceforth increasingly confronting humanity and the earth. It must be empowered to adopt and enforce world laws and regulations. So the United Nations must become a world republic. They must become a world state. Let us strengthen and reform the United Nations into a United States of the world, or a world union like the European Union. So the United Nations in its present state is too weak. And that's what we know, that's what we see. And here you have a man, Jean Monnet, and he's called, he says here in Wikipedia, he's an influential supporter of European unity. He's considered as one of the founding fathers of the European Union. He was called the father of Europe by those who see his innovative and pioneering efforts in the 1950s as the key to establishing the European coal and steel community, the predecessor of today's European Union. So that's what I said. First they started with trade and economics, and then it grew towards the European Union. That's the same thing they want to repeat now in North America with Canada, United States and Mexico. First they start with trade, and then it becomes a union later. Now, although Monnet was never elected to public office, he worked behind the scenes of American and European, it's also interesting, also American governance, as well as a well-connected, pragmatic internationalist. So he is in favor of a sovereign international state and get rid of the sovereign international state and get rid of the national states. And he writes, the community is not an end in itself. Now, he's quoted now in another book here. The community is not an end in itself. It is a process of transformation that continues the one from which our national forms of life emerged in the course of an earlier phase of history. Like our provinces yesterday, our people today must learn to live together under common rules and institutions freely agreed upon if they want to reach the dimensions necessary for their progress and keep control of their destiny. So what he's basically saying here is that, like the provinces of our nation, France, they one day said, okay, it's way smarter if we unite and become a nation. He says, so the nations today have to learn what the provinces had to learn, that it's better to unite to a world nation. And fascinating for me is that very often they argue with very nationalistic arguments. It's good for us. It's good for our progress as a nation. And we can have control over our destiny as a nation. Which is basically a lie. Okay, but that's how they sell this whole package. So he goes on, the sovereign nations of the past are no longer the frame that can solve the problems of the present. And the community itself is only a stage towards the forms of an organized world of tomorrow. So it's very explicit here. And these are the people that are absolutely driving forces in this whole union stuff. Be it the United Nations, be it the European Union. We saw de Gaulle, we saw Churchill, now we see this man who is called the father of the European Union. It is it's the explicit goal to get rid of the national states and to have the sovereign international state. So we need an organized world. And now Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he says, the last blank space have vanished from the map of mankind. By the way, this is also a very important man. A very important man. There is contact everywhere, a Jesuit by the way, sorry. There is contact everywhere, and how close it has become. Preceded by a tremor, the final act is already visibly preparing. The final act. Although the form is not yet discernible, mankind tomorrow will awaken to a pan-organized world. So here we have this organized world that Monet was talking about, and interesting is that Chardin says that mankind will awaken to this pan-organized world. So somehow they must sleep, right? And if I look at the people around me, yeah, they are really sleeping. They don't see anything of this going on. They think life is as it has been always, and what they also don't see and don't understand is, you know, if I look, for example, at the parliament here in Germany, they're making decisions that you'd really have the impression they don't care for the national interests. And I would say, yeah, that's probably what they do. They don't care for the national interests because there is a goal for this world. And this goal is that the supreme rule that is to be followed is that politics have to serve the international interests rather than national interests. Okay, but I don't want to get into politics here. And here's a report by the Club of Rome. Gary H. Carr was talking about, and this is another book they published, The First Global Revolution. And in this book they have a chapter that's called The Vacuum. And what they mean is that there is no uniting enemy anymore. And what they mean we will see here. The ploy of finding a scapegoat is as old as mankind itself. Bring the divided nation together to face an outside enemy, either a real one or else one invented for the purpose. Okay, that's how rulers did it since ever. If their own nation was divided, they had to find an outward enemy to fight, and this would bring the nation together. And typically they would use war or something like this. And by the way, this is also what I think is the only thing, and I have read an article a year ago or so, no, it's half a year ago, less than half a year ago, where they said the only thing that can, for Biden, that can bring America together would be a war. And of course, and this war must be sold, at least in the propaganda, it must be a war that is meant to defend, that is necessary to defend the United States. Okay, so rulers since ever used outward enemies to unite their nation. And they say, now we have a vacuum. We don't have a common enemy that we can fight that would serve as an enemy that could bring the world together. And so they say new enemies have to be identified. New strategies imagined and new weapons devised. The new enemies are different in their nature and location, but they are no less real. They threaten the whole human race, and their names are pollution, water shortage, famine, malnutrition, illiteracy, and unemployment. However, it appears, now all these are topics we are very familiar with because they are presented before our eyes very often and repeatedly. However, it appears that, by the way, we are in the 90s here. However, it appears that awareness of the new enemies is, as yet, insufficient for bringing about world cohesion. So they say, we bring these topics before the people's minds: pollution, water shortage, famine, malnutrition, but it doesn't work that well. Okay, people do not really jump on that train. And now on page 75, so we have to find a better enemy. And now on page 75, they say, in searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite the whole world, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. And now they bring up this thing like global warming. And global warming really seems to, as they express, to fit the bill. Works obviously way better than all the other topics. Now, there was an article in Germany, als Grönland noch grün war, when Greenland was still green. This was published in 2003. Now, I think you probably won't find an article in the German press today that says something like this. But 20 years ago, this was possible. They say, despite the greenhouse effect, it was 1,000 years ago warmer on Earth than it is today, a new study shows. And I just put the article here in the... we read it. The past decade has been the warmest since modern weather records began. This is one of the reasons why every new heat record is now seen as the harbinger of extraordinary global warming. However, contrary to popular belief, today's time is not the hottest in history of the Earth. Researchers have now been able to prove for the first time that in the Middle Ages, from 1800 to 1300, it was warmer worldwide than it is today. It has long been known that in the so-called medieval climate optimum in Greenland it was green, hence the name. And viticulture flourished in England. So far, however, climate researchers have considered the warm phase to be limited to North Atlantic and Europe. In addition, it was not classified as warmer than the current climate. The climate was therefore exposed to greater fluctuations. In the climatic optimum, agriculture flourished and famines in Europe became rare. The annual mean temperatures were around 1.5 degrees higher than today. This proves once again that the climate can change in a comparatively short time even without humans. Nevertheless, the study does not contradict the theory of the man-made greenhouse effect. This is the funny thing, okay? Now, I will show you a graphic in a moment. They say, we know that it has been warmer, that it was warmer on this earth than it is today. And climate has changed since ever. Without humans. But this time, humans should be responsible for it. And it's impossible that this change now is without any human intervention. That's somehow the weird thing about this whole discussion. Okay, Okay, we read on. Most climate researchers believe that the increase in carbon dioxide and other emissions could cause temperatures to rise further in the next few decades. On the other hand, a stronger sun could have been responsible for the medieval heat, says Jörg Negedank from the Geoforschungszentrum Potsdam. Jörg Negedank. From around 1300 it got colder. In May of 1303 the farmers in Germany were standing in front of their frozen seeds and had no idea how hard times would be. So there's the little ice age followed. The study reveals that temperatures around the world were more than 2 degrees below today's. It only got warmer and warmer at the end of the 19th century. These climatic fluctuations are not unusual. Scientists have now demonstrated several climate cycles in ice cores. The historical temperatures can be derived from the air trapped in the ice. Unknown climate influences dictated the climate, and therefore the air in the ice a straight rhythm like a drummer in a marching band. So it was in Roman times, about 1,000 years before the medieval optimum, locally also warmer than today. This is also proven by alpine glaciers that were smaller than they are today. And I know from my school time, this has always been one great argument. The glaciers are melting, they're getting smaller, we will all die. Okay. And they say we know that they were smaller than today. We know that. And every honest scientist knows that. Okay. However, there are no worldwide data for this time, and the triggers for the historical climate change cannot be precisely determined either. Climatologists suspect regular changes in solar radiation. The current warming could also, at least in part, be due to unknown causes. This is important. I mean, they said we had this, in Roman times, we had this very warm period, then it got colder, then we had the medieval warm period, and then there was this little ice time. And then if there was an ice time, we should expect that it gets warmer again. And that's what they say. What happened in the 19th century? It got warmer. But all of a sudden, this getting warmer should be because of CO2. Okay. But here he says it could also be due to unknown causes. Okay. For example, changes in solar radiation. Heinz, in doing so, he contradicts his research colleagues who have already clearly identified humans as the culprit on the basis of computer simulations. Now, just for those that are interested in this whole thing. And here you see this graphic, okay, where it shows the up and down of temperature in this world. Okay, and you see around zero you have the Roman warm period, and then you have the medieval warm period, and you had the small ice time, and then there is the modern warm period. Okay. Now, CO2. I have this in here just as a side information. Now, this is dealing with CO2 content in greenhouses. And they did some research. Is it reasonable to use CO2, to rise the CO2 level in greenhouses? And in regards to ventilation, and they say, we conclude that the optimal management of carbon fertilization should aim at concentrations well above 1000 ppm in the absence of ventilation. Now, 1000 ppm, well above 1000 ppm. We are at 300 to, I think, 400. Okay, and we consider this to be a really threat to this world. And they say the best thing for plants would be above 1000. In the absence of ventilation, now they are talking about ventilation. What they are saying is if you use ventilation and you're putting in CO2 in your greenhouse, the ventilator will blow all that CO2 out. So there is no reason and no sense in rising the CO2 level in your greenhouse if you're losing ventilation, because then you'll blow the CO2 out. Okay, but that's interesting. So, and a high CO2 level is good for your plants in your greenhouse. And there was a guy who, you have 385 ppm, and his pine tree grew like this. Then he had another pine tree, and he increased the CO2 level up to 835. Now this is still not the 1000 they proposed for a greenhouse, but you see the difference in growth. There's another article where they were discussing this CO2 content and the growth for plants. And they say you have here the atmospheric thing, you have 100%. And then if you're rising the CO2 content to 1000, 1200, so 3 to 4 times as high as we have it in our atmosphere today, you will end up with 200% of growth, more than 200% of growth. And I even found an article where researchers found that with tomatoes, if they are exposed to a 2 to 3 times higher CO2 content in the greenhouse, they will have a higher produce, they will have larger fruits, and they will even have a higher sugar content. Okay, just as a side information in this whole discussion about global warming and CO2 content. And there was an article released by the leaders of Fridays for Future, Why We Strike Again. This is at the end of 2019. And then they wrote very interesting words about this climate change and this movement. After all, the climate crisis is not just about the environment. Okay, there is more attached to it. It is a crisis of human rights, of justice, and of political will. And now there are very interesting words coming. Colonial, racist, and patriarchal systems of oppression have created and fueled it. We need to dismantle them all. So they clearly state that this climate crisis issue, this Fridays for Future issue, is not just about environment, it is about a political revolution. That's what they are saying. And you can ask yourself, colonial, racist and patriarchal systems have created this climate problem? I mean, you could say, okay, colonial, what has this to do with climate? What has race issue to do with climate? I mean, does it mean that maybe white people are, the greater threat to the environment than other colored people? What has patriarchal system? What has the man to do? Is a man polluting more the environment than a woman? Or you really have to ask yourself, and you don't understand these words if you don't understand the whole movement and its mindset and their great enemy. And I found it interesting that were some people commenting on this. Here's colonial, racist and patriarchal systems of oppression have created and fueled it. And he's commenting on this, he says, but just need to point out that the most peaceful, wealthy, tolerant, creative and civilized societies with the greatest achievement in women's rights and the lowest population rate, and I'm guessing the most environmentally sound societies, are those built and created by the much hated white patriarchal societies. It's somehow this mindset, I don't know, that the great problem is the white man. So if you are a man, you have a problem in today's world. If you are a white man, you have a bigger problem. And if you want to be the biggest problem, if you want to have the biggest problems, then you have to be a white man, conservative Christian. And there another comment that I also find interesting. A generation or two ago, people like Greta ran China. They were called Red Gods. The consequences were awful. Now China has moved past the horrors of cultural revolution while the West is sinking into it. The consequences are likely to be terrible this time as well. That's what I said at the beginning. Okay, red socialism, green socialism, and this. I don't want to get into this. Now, I also want to have a look in the Bible. In Revelation 7, it reads, after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, now, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. Now, this group is the 144,000. So it's that group that is living when Jesus Christ returns. In this mark of the beast, seal of the God issue, they decided to take the side of God and be faithful to His commands, His commandments. So this is this group that is titled, Here is the Patience of the Saints and those that keep the commandments of God. And they are living when Christ returns. And of this group, it now says, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation. So here we see the great tribulation. And washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. They shall neither hunger anymore, nor thirst anymore. So obviously this was their experience. Okay, in this time of persecution they had hunger and thirst. But it says something else. The sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So obviously it belongs, or it is part of their experience they went through, is that there was a good amount of heat on this earth. So we maybe should expect that there's something happening with the sun. Now there is something happening with the sun, and this is reported in the 7 last plagues. It's in the 4th plague. There is great heat, and it's torturing those that have the mark of the beast. But that's the point. These plagues are poured upon those that have received the mark of the beast, like the the plagues in Egypt, they hit the Egyptians, not the Israelites. And the same it is at the end. These plagues hit those that receive the mark of the beast, but not the faithful ones. And that is my conclusion now, that yes, there is extreme heat coming in the 7 last plagues, but there is also obviously, or maybe, a heat coming that will also those faithful to God will have to struggle with. Okay, so we should expect some changes in nature, also in the sun, taking place. Is there a problem with this? Yes. The greatest problem that we have is not so much the heat, and it's not the CO2, because plants grow very good with CO2. You saw the pictures, and I don't have any problems if our winters is not 6 months but only 4 months long. But the great problem that we have is water supply. Okay, the warmer it is, the more water your plants need, and without water there is nothing going. Okay, so we need water. Now, back to topic. So we see this world should move towards a world government. But how do we get there? And you cannot just bring this world system upon the population, upon the people of this world. You need to prepare them. And the best way to prepare them is through the educational system. And that means we need a new education. Now we have to have a look at a man that is called William George Carr. And he was an educator and author who is most known for being the executive secretary of the National Education Association. This is the association in the United States. He was also a teaching consultant for the US delegation for the Charter meetings of the United Nations and UNESCO. He served as General Secretary and President of the World Confederation of Organization of the Teaching Profession. So he was also obviously in international affairs very busy. In 1945, he attended the Charter meetings of the United Nations and UNESCO as a teaching consultant. Okay, so he was a very, very important man in this whole UNESCO thing. And UNESCO, it's I don't know exactly the name. It's United Nations for Education, Science and Culture Organization, so something like this. So UNESCO is responsible for education. So this man was very important in this. And he wrote in 1947, "All the leaders of tomorrow are in schools today. The psychological foundations for wider loyalties must be laid. Teach those attitudes which will result ultimately in the creation of a world citizenship and world government. We can and should teach those skills and attitudes which will help to create a society in which world citizenship is possible." So the children need to be prepared for world citizenship, not for national citizenship, but world citizenship. Encourage therefore all kinds of international contacts, however slight, as long as they are cooperative and constructive. World government, when and if we get it, will be the product of planned education. Now, that's why you have all these exchange programs at your university, at your school. Because you want to prepare the people for the students for this international, this world society. And that's why you are trying to have your campus as multicultural, as international as possible, because on this campus there are some of the leaders of tomorrow. And the campus is for the student, the home for, I don't know, 5 years. And he is then used to have a multicultural home and will then be a leader that is bringing this mindset into his activities and in his leadership later, and is preparing and is a very important instrument in creating this world citizenship. That's why you have all these exchange programs. It's for preparing people for world citizenship. Now the UNESCO, they published a series that is called Towards World Understanding. And I think this is in booklet, these were several booklets, I think this is booklet 5. Before the child enters school, his mind has already been profoundly marked and often injuriously marked by earlier influences. Now, what are these earlier influences? The child is profoundly marked or sometimes even injured. We read on. Our inquiry, it appears, the only answer is the parents, okay, the home. Our inquiry was limited to children between 3 and 13 years of age. These early years may be indispensable to the education of children for world citizenship. Now, 3 years already. You wonder why they always want the children go to kindergarten and to have the children, to separate the children as early as they can from parents. It's because they want to educate the children as early as they can. Okay, and the shorter the time is that parents can educate the children, can mark them and endure them, the better it is for that system. The kindergarten or infant school has a significant part to play in the child's education. Not only can it correct many of the errors of home training, but it can prepare the child for membership in a world society. So here you see the parents, they are injuring their children with false views. As long as the child breathes the poisoned air of nationalism, so here you see this thing. Okay, now here is the point of nationalism coming up. Now, if you read nationalism, you read, oh, this is this exaggerated patriotism that is glorifying your own nation and is, suppressing other nations. But that's not the nationalism they are referring to. The nationalism they mean is this nationalism, this fight for a sovereign, united national state. That's their great enemy. Why is it their great enemy? Because the United Nations shall become a sovereign international state, a world republic, and it can only become a world republic that can dictate and rule the world if sovereign national states disappear. Okay, and that's why they have such a problem with nationalism. In the sense, again, to the fourth time, of keeping national sovereign states. So the parents are poisoning their children with this nationalism. As long as the child breathes the poisoned air of nationalism, education in world-mindedness can procure only rather precarious results. Okay, that's logic. If the child is trained to be a good patriot and to love their country and keep that country sovereign, then this makes a world state impossible. And that's their problem. As we have pointed out, it is frequently the family that infects the child with extreme nationalism. The school should therefore use the means described earlier to combat family attitudes that favor jingoism. Now we're coming up with extreme. That's a typical way to deal with this. You're pointing the extreme before people in order to fight the complete thing. Okay. But anyways, this is an article in the Journal of the National Education Association. In the struggle to establish an adequate world government, the teacher can do much to prepare the hearts and minds of children. At the very top of all the agencies which will assure the coming of world government must stand the school, the teacher, and the organized profession. So the education system is absolutely key to this, to the outcome of their efforts to establish a world system, world government. That means yours and my children. Now, this caused some kind of counter-winds in the United States. Okay, because there were people that clearly saw that this argumentation against nationalism is actually an argumentation against the national sovereignty of the United States, in essence. And there was a book written, Turning the Tides. It was first published in 1953. And there the writer Josef wrote, "School textbooks have, as a rule, been written with so little objectivity and integrity that history, as generally taught up to now, has been an obstacle to international understanding." And by this he's quoting this out of this booklet. Okay. of the UNESCO. And now he's commenting, truth in the statement there is, but does the seminar propose that archives be opened, that an era of great enlightenment now begin? It does not. What then does the seminar suggest? It does not suggest, it demands. What it demands is that historical literature be revised under UNESCO auspices. Okay. So history has to be rewritten. Textbooks have to be rewritten. Education must be changed. The text announces that children should study the history of their own country only in relation to its part in the development of the whole of humanity. Okay, everything must be brought in international setting, in international context. Okay. Local history, state history, American history, all are secondary. Recommended are certain charts. Some will illustrate the construction of the pyramids and the Parthenon, the expedition of Alexander, Buddha and Confucius, the Vikings, the Crusades, Magna Carta, Christopher Columbus, the American Declaration of Independence, the French Revolution, the Red Cross, the League of Nations. And then they're saying, and the attentive reader already realized that there is something missing here. Absent is all reference to him whom we call the Prince of Peace, by those who talk of peace. Okay, and that's exactly the problem. They want to have peace, but they're trying it without him who could bring the peace. And he also says, as the Honorable William Jenner of Indiana put in the Senate of the United States, he quotes, I want to make one thing clear. This war against our Constitution is not being fought way off in Madagascar or in Mandalay. It is being fought here in our schools, our colleges, our churches, our women's clubs. So they are changing everything. Everything is brought under this new mindset. How many of you senators know what the UN is doing to change the teaching of the children in your own hometown? The UN is at work there every day and night, changing the teachers, changing the teaching materials, changing the very words and tones, changing all the essential ideas which we imagine our schools are teaching to our young folks. How in the name of heaven are we to sit here, approve these programs, appropriate our own people's money for such outrageous orientation of our own children and of the men and women who teach our children in this nation's schools? I don't think I have to comment on this. These are strong words. And now they then were way more careful from the side of UNESCO, because they saw, okay, there's resistance. Here we have Robert Miller, who's called the father of global occupation. We already had look at him, and he says here, the pressures for a proper, universal, global education are being felt everywhere, from the United Nations and multinational business to the local communities and individuals. I mean, do you feel the pressure for a global education? But they say we do. It is a potent, invaluable trend of cardinal importance to our survival and future evolution. A world core curriculum might seem utopian today, he writes in 1982. By the end of the year 2000, it will be a down-to-earth daily reality in all the schools of the earth. So they are promising a change for us. And I have to say, if I look at the young people that are coming forth, and I even look at my generation, there were still some who thought patriotically, but it's almost completely gone in the young people of today. Okay, there's no almost when there's the World Cup, yes, of course, then we swing our flags, but once the World Cup is gone, flags back, no one has seen it. Okay, so just to show this new education concept is very fruitful and it achieves its goal. And this new, at least here in Germany, this new those people that are now 15, 20, 25, they are ready for this world system. And here we have an article. Pope Francis calls for a new education pact at audience with UNESCO and experts. So Pope and UNESCO and the United Nations, we need a new education pact. So the already new education needs to be updated. Okay, we have to speed up in this, okay, because time is running out, and this world will we will all die if we don't take serious actions now. Now we saw the kings of the earth, we saw the merchants of the earth in this triangle, and now the third player is still missing, and that's the harlot, the Roman Catholic Church. And let us see what she has to say in relation to this. And we just saw that the Pope is involved in this whole thing as well. Now this is from the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes. That's something they elaborated there. It is our clear duty, therefore, to strain every muscle in working for the time when all war can be completely outlawed by international consent. This goal undoubtedly requires the establishment of some universal public authority acknowledged as such by all and endowed with the power to safeguard on the behalf of all security, regard for justice, and respect for rights. Now this is always in a very gloomy language and lots of commas, but they're saying we need a universal public authority acknowledged by all, and that she should have the power to achieve its goals and on a global scale. But before this hoped for authority can be set up, the highest existing international centers must devote themselves vigorously to the pursuit of better means for obtaining common security. Okay, and so the highest existing international centers, this is the United Nations, for example. And then they also say in paragraph 82, consequently, there is above all a pressing need for a renewed education of attitudes and for a new inspiration in public opinion. And this is a very fascinating thing. Now we are in the 1602, 1605, the Second Vatican Council was. And they said we need a new education, and this is nothing new for us. We already came across it. But they also said we need a new inspiration in public opinion. And what is that? This is the media. Okay? So they say we need to change the education and we need to change the media, because these two are educating the people. Basically, you have the education is teaching the younger people and the media is teaching and educating the older people. And we have to change both of them. There's a new education needed, and there is a new public opinion to be spread. Very fascinating. And now this is me summing up some of the words of that Gaudium et Spes. Gaudium et Spes. In paragraph 84, it is said that the community of people must give itself an order. Christians should gladly and wholeheartedly help build this international order. The fact that these passages are written with a future perspective makes it clear that the United Nations organization is not understood as such an order. She is counted among those highest existing international bodies mentioned in the above quote. According to the Second Vatican Council, a structure is needed that goes beyond the UN and its powers, an organization that owns sufficient effective power to assert its goals and views worldwide. And it is precisely this authority that is so urgently needed that the UN is missing. And here you have Pope calls for a new world order. This is in 2004. Pope John Paul II launched one of the most important diplomatic initiatives of his long papacy yesterday when he called for a new international order to replace the one that emerged from the Second World War. So the United Nations is to be replaced by a more powerful international order, by a world government. The Pope said the new world order he wanted would be able to provide solutions to the problems of today based on the dignity of human beings and integrated development of society, solidarity between rich and poor nations, and on the sharing of resources and the extraordinary results of scientific and technological progress. Blah, blah, blah. This is basically an international socialism. Okay, that's what this is. An international socialism. The Pope believes that not enough of these goals are being achieved with the present system of international organizations that emerged in the late 40s, including the United Nations, and this is politics, EMF and the World Bank, and this is including the financial sector as well. So also the financial sector, there's a transformation needed. Pope Francis warns of destruction of Earth's ecosystem in leaked encyclical. Francis also called for a new global political authority, tasked with tackling the reduction of pollution and the development of poor countries and regions. His appeal echoed that of his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, who in a 2009 encyclical proposed a kind of super UN to deal with the world's economic problems and injustices. So we see that Roman Catholic Church is absolutely on the way and is absolutely also in favor of this world system. So she's in agreement with the kings of the earth and with the merchants of the earth. And this is again me writing. Reference is made here particularly to paragraph 175 of Francis' encyclical, in which the Pope writes of the need for a true world political authority, quoting with these words from paragraph 67 of the encyclical Caritas in Veritate by Pope Benedict XVI. There the former Pope declares, as his predecessor Pope John Paul II did, and you see thereby that this is not just an idea of Pope Francis. It's many popes that, this is part of Roman Catholic teaching, and we will come to this in a moment. There the former Pope declares, as his predecessor Pope John Paul II did, that a reform of both the United Nations Organization and international economic and financial structures is needed. So everything needs to be changed. Politics and the whole financial system need to be changed. Here too, there is not only the restructuring of the political, but also of the global financial system. This finally established superordinated level of international order must have the authority to ensure compliance with its decisions from all parties, and also with the coordinate measures adopted in various international forums. With these remarks on a true world political authority, Benedict XVI is, according to Francis, on the line of what has been already developed by the social doctrine of the Church. And here it is. So this concept of a world government and this whole restructuring of politics and financial system and setting up this world system, he said, has already been developed by the social doctrine of the Church. This means this worldwide restructuring of political society and the financial sector is not simply the wish of some popes. We are dealing here with the Roman Catholic Church's roadmap for this world. It is part of her doctrine. That is important. When he, Francis, was asked in an interview if he was thinking of a Marxist type of society, he answered, "It has been said many times, and my response has always been that, if anything, it is the communists who think like the Christians." And for many Christians, this is like a shock, and the heart stops beating. Christ spoke of a society where the poor, the weak, and the marginalized have the right to decide. Not demagogues, not Barabbas, but the people, the poor, whether they have faith in a transcendent God or not. Okay. The communists and the Christians. I mean, if you would have presented that quote to someone, I know some people that came from the communism, really faithful Christians, I mean, they would jump at this man's neck, okay? Communism and Christianity are so far away from another, like the East is from the West. Now let us go a step further. In the last presentation on this part A of that series, I laid, so to say, the theoretical foundation for what we're talking about today. I maybe haven't said it like this, but now I say it. And one thing that I showed is that there is always a building of a tower attached to the system of Babylon. You had the ancient Babylonian Empire, and there you had the Tower of Babel. Now God confused the languages, they had to stop their building project, and the tower decayed. Then you had Hammurabi I, who established the old Babylonian Empire, and he tried to restore that building. And then you had Nebuchadnezzar. In the new Babylonian Empire, he also is talking about that he is restoring that tower and making his top as high as the sky. So there's always this building of a tower attached to Babylon. And now we know that at the end of time, the system of Babylon is set up again. Now, it's not on a local scale, but on a global scale. This is typological prophecy now here. And that means it's a figuratively, it's just a picture. So it's not a real tower that is built, but something like this. It's just served as a picture. And the question is there a tower built? And I say yes. And what about this picture here? This is the building of the EU Parliament in Strasbourg, finished 2000, in the year 2000. And I heard a pastor who passed it by every week. And he one day decided to have a closer look at this building, because whenever he passed this building, he asked himself, what was in this architect's mind when he designed that building? Now, he has a constructional background and he's very interested in architecture and engineering. And he said, because in an artistic way, this building looks unfinished, like it's still in construction process. And sometime later, he inquired what the design of that building was about. And the reason he did is because he found a picture in which he recognized that building in Strasbourg. And the picture that he found is this. This is from the artist Peter Bruegel. And characteristic for this picture are the levels, like stairs. Okay, the tower is like the tower is cut open from the top left down to the bottom right. And you also have a smaller tower in the center. Now, the result of his research was that the architects didn't make a joke. They really had Bruegel's picture as a model for their design. And Strasbourg should reflect the unfinished Tower of Babel. And by the way, the rings that are surrounding the building and the vertical rods, they should represent the scaffolding integrated in the design. So this also underlies this ongoing construction process in this Tower of Babel thing. And if you take these two pictures in comparison, it's very easy to recognize the similarities. You have you easily recognize the levels, the stairs, okay, from the top left down to the bottom right, and they also adopted the small tower in the center of the building. And you also have the water on the left is picked up. Okay, now on the right it's not water but it's grass, but you have the same proportions. Now, is this coincidence? I know we are all taught evolution, and as evolution taught and trained people, we have a very strong confidence and faith in coincidence. Yeah, but I think this goes beyond any confidence and faith. Now, of course, the building of Strasbourg is not an exact copy of that building. It's not the architectural style of the 16th century, but of our days. And it is also designed that way that it works. Okay, it should serve a certain function. It cost at least 500 million euros, so they did not just want to have a building that looks like the Tower of Babel, but they want to use that building. So of course it has to be built in a modern style. But still, it's obvious, the similarity here. The reference to Bruegel's picture is obvious. Now, if you make research today, you will find that the architects, they say they chose a Roman amphitheater as a model. Now, if that is true, or if it's that just put that way afterwards because of a certain resistance that was coming up, we don't know. But again, the reference to Bruegel's picture is obvious. You really have to see it. Otherwise, you're blind, I dare to say. And here you have Handelsblatt, this is a German newspaper, and here you see European Union, the link to the Tower of Babel. And now there was a man, David Hathaway, he made a documentary on this, the proximity of the European Union symbolism to Babylon. And he tells us an experience that he made when he was at the European Parliament in Strasbourg. There he met a journalist that was born in Strasbourg, and he says the following. While filming these scenes, I asked a journalist born in Strasbourg if she understood the meaning of the tower. That means the parliament. She did, and confirmed that the members of the European Parliament also understood that it represented Babel from the Bible, but that the purpose of the European Union was to finish what Nimrod and the people together had failed to do some 3,500 years ago. Quite plain words. So this journalist said, yes, I know what this represents, and those politicians in that building back then, in the year 2000, they also know what this represents. And I remember that, I think it was in 2005, when in my French classes we also had the topic of the European Union and why the European Union is so beautiful and wonderful and everything like this. And we then were to sing a song, and that was a real song, that was composed because of the treaties of Maastricht, I think. And it says, Europe, Babel, Europe, ma belle. Now this is French. In English this means Europe, Babel, Europe, my beauty. So here again you see the clear reference to the Tower of Babel that is made with the European Union. Now there was a poster or a placard, whatever the right word be, that the European Union released in I don't know exactly the year. I think it's in the 90s. And there you see again the Tower of Babel, obviously. And you see supposedly you see the European stars above that tower. What can we say about this picture? We see that this tower is in construction because there is a crane. And in fact, it is in better condition than Bruegel's tower, because with the stone pit in the middle of the right side already removed, and the small tower in the center is now finished. In Bruegel's picture it wasn't finished, but here it's finished. So they are saying, we are building this tower, we are completing this tower. What the people with Nimrod failed, we will now accomplish, we will finish that tower. Now, very interesting are the stars above that tower. Because if you look at the European flag, you will see that the stars are the other way around. And wherever the European Union portrays itself, the stars are in the correct order. But here they are turned upside down. And if you show this to someone that is familiar with esoteric stuff and occultism, and especially occultism, he will very quickly realize, and the proportions of these stars, I mean, look at them. What's going on there? And this is not only really that you can say, okay, because the perspective is of a certain way, that's why the upper the upper part of the star is greater. Then the proportions are wrong like this. Okay, these stars have these proportions because of a certain reason. And if you show this to someone that is familiar with occultism, he will easily say to you what these proportions are, and these are these. It's the head of Baphomet, a symbol of the devil in occultism. And again, you can ask yourself, is this coincidence? What was going on in the artist's mind when he designed that? Okay, and the fact that they're turned upside down. So this is not coincidence. And here you have the treaties of Rome that were signed in 1957. Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands and West Germany, they laid the foundation for what is called the European Union today. Was the European Economic Community back then. And these treaties of Rome this Treaty of Rome is one of the most important treaties in what is now the European Union. And the other important treaty is the Maastricht Treaty. It's a foundation treaty of the European Union. Now this was signed in the Hall of the Horatians and Curators, the first floor of the Palazzo dei Conservatori on Capitoline Hill in the Vatican. And there you see on the right, you see Pope, I think it's Pope Urban V. I don't know exactly, but I think. So the first question you could ask, why did they go to the Vatican and sign? I mean, in Italy you could take whatever hall there is. There are certainly other halls, but why did they choose this hall in the Vatican? There where the Pope figure is. First question. You could say, okay, this happened once. Good. Now in 2010, there was an article in Süddeutsche Zeitung, A Strong and Capable Europe. There it says, when we signed the treaty establishing a constitution for Europe in Rome on October 24th, together with the other heads of state and government, as well as the foreign ministers of the European Union, the solemn signing ceremony will take place in the historic hall of the Horatians and Curetes in the capital. At the same place where also European founding treaties were signed on March 25, 1957, we will give to a united Europe a constitution. So they say, we will go back to this hall again. And so they are. This is the hall. And now everything is arranged properly. And this is what you see is Urban the Eighth. Sorry, I said Urban the Fifth. Urban the Eighth is sitting there. And they place the table where the treaties are signed directly at the feet of Urban the Eighth. And so they were sitting at the feet of the Pope, and the Pope is stretching out his hand and is blessing, to bless. I mean, this scene, this is not happening by hazard, okay? This is planned. The arrangement of this whole setting is planned. And so they place this table where they are signing the treaty directly at the feet of the Pope. And the Pope stretches out his hand in a blessing gesture. And also, some years later, the Declaration of Rome, okay, the multiple speed Europe, was signed there. And they also had a meeting with the Pope afterwards. Now, this is now the third time they were there, at least the third time. Audience with the Pope inclusive. The ceremony is planned in detail. There it says that this ceremony now, that was held there, I think it was in 2017. There it says that it will take place in the same hall, in the hall of the Horatians and Curetes, exactly where 60 years ago, the treaty for the European Economic Community was signed. That marked the birth of our European Union. And so in 2017 they go back to the exact same hall, and then it says afterwards there was a group photo with the Pope, and everything was planned in detail, so there is nothing left to the hazard. Everything is planned in detail. And here you have the picture they made with Pope Francis. And when I saw that picture, I had to laugh, because the arrangement again is really saying so much. I only say so much. What you see in the front is a mirror of what you see in the back. You saw it? Now look at this. So you have like Christ in the middle and the candles to the right and to the left. They here arranged it. You have the Pope in the middle and all these ministers and politicians to the right and to the left. Are they trying to tell us something here? I don't know. So in this hall, you had to the feet of those popes, you had the Treaty of Rome, which marked the birth of the European Union. You had the European Constitution, and you had the Declaration of Rome, when the European Union was struggling with direction. All this is signed there at the feet of the Pope figure. And later they had this photo where the Pope is in the middle, like Christ in the middle, and all the rest to the left and to the left and to the right. Are they trying to tell us something? And we go a step further. Because we know, okay, we are moving towards a world government. What about the world religion? And it's not only the United Nations organization, but there is also United Religions Initiative. And there it says, we unite to bridge differences between people of all beliefs to create unity and to solve local and global challenges. Francis leading imams signed covenant pushing us toward one world religion. And this isn't Charisma News. So they are pushing towards one world religion, and you have Pope Francis and the leading imam. And here is an interesting article. Replace the United Nations with United Religions. Shimon Peres' proposal to Pope Francis. Now, Shimon Peres was the former head of Israel, State of Israel. And it says, now, given the fact that the United Nations has had its day, what is needed is an organization of united religions and a UN of religions. This is what Shimon Peres said. Then the article writes, Shimon Peres therefore immediately added that he already knew the right person at the head of United Religions, namely Pope Francis. When I look around today, I realize one thing. Perhaps for the first time in history, the Holy Father is a respected leader who as such is respected not only by many people, but also by the various religions and their representatives. And what's more, maybe he's the only really respected leader. That is why I came up with this idea that I proposed to Pope Francis. So Pope Francis, or the Pope, being the heads of united religions of this one world religion. And this is a wonderful idea because, you know, we already have the 10 Commandments for this one world religion, and you find them here. When I'm making a lecture, I would ask people, what is this? And people would say, oh, this is the Ark of the Covenant. And I said, oh, it's the Ark of the Covenant. Then what is this? And then people stop and say, oh, this is the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, this is the Ark of the Covenant. So back, what is this? Then people would sit there and would think. And the answer is, this is the Ark of Hope of the United Nations. And it's obviously a copy of the Ark of the Covenant of the Bible. Now, but in this Ark of Hope, there's not the 10 Commandments of the Bible, but the 10 Commandments of the United Nations in there. They were called so. But I lost the quote, but I know it exists. That's the Earth Charter. They were published in the beginning of 2000, and they represent the fundamental values and principles considered useful by its supporters for building a just, sustainable and peaceful global society. Now, this is basically what the 10 Commandments are designed to be from the side of God. But men don't want to have the 10 Commandments. They don't want to have Jesus. They want to have their own gods. They want to have themselves. They want to establish a kingdom of peace without God. And so they need their own 10 Commandments. They comprise 16 principles and they are stored in the Ark of Hope. Now in Wikipedia it says about the Earth Charter. The idea of the Earth Charter originated in 1986 by Maurice Strong, who also called them the 10 Commandments of the United Nations, and Mikhail Gorbachev as members of the Club of Rome, when the United Nations World Commission, blah, blah, blah. So you have the Club of Rome involved in this. So you see there's one thing coming to another. That's always funny. Now the United Nations, they had a virtual concert in the Pacific in the summer of 2020. It reads, from across the region, the United Nations in the Pacific brought together artists, United Nations leaders, heads of states and international celebrities in the world's first regional COVID-19 concert. The final act, the concert closed with a moving performance of a song called We Will Rise, written about the coronavirus pandemic in the Pacific and performed by Pacifica Voices International School Suva. Sung primarily by children. That's not so important. Now the song. Around the world we're closing borders, COVID-19 on the rise. A new world order behind closed doors. The storm will pass. We will survive. So in this corona crisis, there is a new world order behind closed doors to rise. Let's sing about that. Okay. So they are planning something. There's something in plan. And this current crisis has its place in this planning. At least that's what the United Nations told us. Now I want to close. Because men are trying to establish a kingdom of peace without God. And Paul is saying us in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, that's exactly what we're all crying out. Peace and safety. We have to unite in order to have peace and safety and whatsoever. He says, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. Man is trying to establish a kingdom of peace without God. They don't want to have Jesus in their system. Remember education, Buddha and Confucius, but not Jesus. Psalm 2, this is our closing text. Why do the nations rage, and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, this is Jesus, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath, and distress them in his deep displeasure. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. No matter what people on this earth do, however mighty those politicians and bankers and whatsoever are, God will prevail. He has set his king, and this king will reign. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. This is talking about Jesus. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, you shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Remember the stone from Daniel 2, coming down and smashing this picture that is representing the kingdoms of this earth. Now therefore be wise, O kings. Now this is addressing now our politicians. Be wise, O kings, be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and with the joys with trembling. And now, kiss the Son, kiss Jesus Christ, lest he be angry, and, in brackets, and kill you, and you perish in the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all those who put their trust in him. And then, my friends, dear friends, that's what we do. We put our trust in him. We don't put our trust in any human efforts to establish a kingdom of peace on this earth. Because these kingdoms are also always established on lie, corruption, and violence. And I think we will see this in future. We will put our trust in the Lord. We are waiting for his kingdom in which righteousness dwells. Stay faithful to God, cling to Jesus Christ, cling to the word of God, and be a light in this world. Share the gospel, share the hope, the good hope that we are waiting for a true kingdom in which righteousness dwells. God bless you.